So full disclaimer, I'm not the most, I'm not a scientist when it comes to understanding the quantity of caffeine in a cup of coffee. But I can tell you that there's a lot of controversy out there about what's best, fresh roasted coffee, coffee that's been on the shelf. And I would say if you're looking for the cleanest coffee, you're going to look for coffee that's been grown organically and in the shade. You're going to look for coffee that has the minimum intermediaries. You're going to look for coffee that was left in the shell and kept dry with no mold up until the very minute before it was exported. So you don't want to have coffee that's turned to green coffee 6 years ago and then roasted last week. Coffee comes in a shell. And so we have an amazing quality control person on the ground who really makes sure that none of that coffee is moldy and that all of that shell comes off just before shipping. And then we find basically, within 4 weeks of roast is optimal. And there's a whole bunch of off-gassing that happens with coffee. As far as making the coffee, French press, good. Pour over, fine. I recently have fallen in love with cold brew. I just find cold brew has so much less acidity, and it's just wonderful and refreshing to drink.
Yeah, I mean, the old adage that we're all unique and individual is just as true as ever with caffeine. I've just been in Europe on the continent and, there's people that drink espresso after dinner. I mean, and to me, that would just be like annihilating the entire evening. I'm much too sensitive to caffeine, but there are definitely people that can do that, and it's part of their culture. There are people who should not really be drinking caffeine at all because it's just way too aggressive against their nervous system, of course. And maybe they're already too acidic and they should be working on drinking alkaline things. And then from the Ayurvedic lens, when you start looking at Ayurvedic nutrition, you hone in on each particular body type, which you start to look at what are the doshas and what is each person's doshic constitution. And when you look at Kapha dosha, which is the most rare really in people, but Kapha dosha does very, very well with the bitter taste. So Ayurveda has 6 tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, astringent, and everything that we eat can be divided into one of those tastes. Now, of course, bitter is one of the most healing tastes to the body. It's very healing to the liver, and it's very, very good for stimulating and balancing Kapha dosha, which is many things and impossible to summarize in this short space. But Kapha dosha does very, very well with bitter. And so if you're dealing with any kapha imbalances, you'd be very smart and wise to incorporate a well brewed, a well thought out, organic and good quality coffee, preferably black coffee, to keeping it as a bitter tonic. Caffeine is an alkaloid that is in black tea and is in green tea, which is the same basic plant, and is in coffee, of course. And there's different levels of caffeine in the way that the things are brewed and the ways that the leaves are harvested and manufactured and processed and the way that we drink them and in the concentration. So I don't go that finite, I would say. But with my personal protocols, I use a lot of green teas. Green teas are extremely beneficial to the body. I actually believe coffee is too, and there's a lot of data around that. And so the idea is, I would say to my clients, if you're stimulated by caffeine, do not drink any types of caffeine, whether it's matcha, a little cup of Earl Grey, or anything after sort of 3-4 p.m., or you're taking the risk of disrupting your nervous system and losing sleep quality, which is way more important.
Just to pick up off of what Emily's saying, it all depends. So you could like to drink it, but it might not be good for you. Those are two very separate things in a conversation that needs to be had. But I think in general, we have to understand the relationship with this substance. And if someone is using it for the benefits, but then they're having these side effects from it, then what are we actually gaining from consuming this, or anything for that matter? So I think in each individual case, there's these parameters or principles to health. And though the subcategories to those parameters or principles are very individual, those principles themselves are very universal. And so it's not an easy conversation to speak this way, because each one of us is going to have a different relationship. And an athlete using caffeine could be completely in a very beneficial and pro-athletic form, but that same person who then goes sits at the desk to send out some work emails can be over caffeinated, and now they can't think straight and they're emotionally exhausted, they're wired but tired, and then you have these issues as well. So you have to really break down a conversation like this. And for me, anytime, whether it's in my previous life, 10 years in clinic, or now working more with leaders and trying to optimize their performance and mental health, it's really about, what are you using it for? Do you understand how it's working for you and how it's working against you? And then we can open up the conversation, because the best coffee bean will do better than the worst, but not if the parameters are not set in place for the person to live out their best health and their best nervous system functionality.